One of the questions I get asked the most often are, did you like North Carolina? Would you recommend it? Why did you leave? All of that. So today we're going to be discussing that. Why we moved there, why we disliked where we lived, and why you may in fact like it very much. I will be reviewing it kind of like an HGTV show, except instead of a house, we're reviewing a whole city. So wish me luck. I've never done this before. Normally in my videos, I try to be really fair and present all the different sides and be educational and, like generally like as unoffensive as I can be with just facts, which sometimes requires a little bit of like toning down my opinions to be just like more palatable, and because it doesn't really matter all the time what my opinions are. Sometimes it really matters and sometimes it doesn't. But this video is going to be a little bit different. Maybe just for this video, or maybe honestly like forever, I'm not going to sugarcoat anything just to avoid making other people feel bad, because it's okay to have opinions and it's okay to feel strongly about this. And 2021 Liz is honest and not apologizing for feelings and all of that. So you've been warned. Okay, so if you followed my channel at all, this won't be a spoiler. We did not like living in North Carolina at all. I will explain why, and because this is the internet, that statement has probably already offended like so many people, and you're like, I'm gonna leave a million comments below before even watching it. But friends, we can all like different things, and that is the beauty of having our own preferences. I absolutely love eating like pickled things, like sauerkraut, like straight out of the jar type of sauerkraut. Does that probably sound like disgusting to most of you? Yeah. Probably, but I like it and that's okay. You don't have to eat it. So my friends, that was just our analogy to say, just because we didn't like living in North Carolina at all doesn't mean that there's anything wrong with it and that you might not absolutely love it. So yay, you. Also, I'm sure you know this, but North Carolina, it's a huge state. We lived in a really smallish town about 25 minutes southwest of Raleigh, and I am very sure that our experience would have been more like our style if we had lived a little bit more towards town, not as much in the country, but we did because we like the country vibes. We like having a little bit of space. So that is the particular area we will be discussing today, is like South Wake County. Okay. Now, let the opinions begin. Hello. If you're new here, welcome. I'm Liz. I am a family nurse practitioner, mom of two, and a passionate rambler. And welcome to my review of a small corner of North Carolina, in case you are just as nosy and want to know about that area, or if you're considering moving there. Again, we lived in a smaller rural town, and I will be the absolute first to admit that we did not research this entire thing enough. We really didn't understand how like traditionally Southern this area would be. There's absolutely nothing wrong with like traditional Southern vibes. They just are not the vibes that we personally jive with, because that's not how we've grown up. So that will absolutely influence a ton about this whole thing. So lesson one, right out of the gate, feel out the area. Now, this may seem incredibly obvious if you're like, well, yeah, Liz, you're moving yourself across the country. But welcome to my life, where I dive in head first, and then later I look around at my surroundings. So don't be me. I thought we would start off with kind of the really inconsequential, like just fact types things that we didn't like. These are purely our own preference, but they weirdly made like a huge difference to us. So first, like the food. I really like food, but I really hate cooking it. So we need to have restaurants. We like to get takeout like 1 or 2 times a week. It just brings our souls joy. But the problem is we don't like I said, like just like traditional Southern type food, because that's not what we were raised on. It's just not our jam. If I could personally eat like Mediterranean food, sushi, Mexican food, and like that's it, I would be delighted. But the most like ethnically probably diverse food our town had was Chipotle, which I absolutely love Chipotle, so that was great for me. But otherwise we had like a lot of fast food places for like a lot of fried chicken, a lot of mom and pop places that had like traditional Southern food. So if you love that, then that's like your mecca, and that's delicious. Again, like I'm sure closer to Raleigh or even Charlotte or other big cities, this isn't like as much of a struggle. And I know it sounds like really shallow to want to move because the food wasn't my favorite, but whatever, here we are. And I can be quite shallow, so I guess that's fine. Also, they didn't have diners. Like, why do you not have diners in the South? Is that just a thing there, or is that all over? Because that's not okay. Like Waffle House and IHOP were the best like breakfast options that they had. They were like, oh yeah, that's like a diner. And that just made my heart sad. I'm like, that is not a diner. Not that, I mean, I've enjoyed many a Waffle House experience, but it's usually one of those experiences that you have at like 2 a.m. with friends after a fun night, not like 8 a.m. with your children. So friends, if you want to like open a booming business, open a diner in that area and serve delicious, like relatively cheap breakfast food, and you will do really, really well. I promise. Next. So I thought I understood hot weather because I grew up in Southern California. But my friends, I had not factored in humidity. Southern and North Carolina it's a beast. Summer weather felt like it kind of lasted from like mid-May to October. And during the summer, it was like too hot to be outside by like 10 a.m. and it wouldn't cool off until like 9 or 10 p.m. So it's really good pool weather, really good. Like I'm just gonna lounge at the beach weather, really difficult. I just need my kids to go play outside weather. But if you hate the cold and love the heat, this would be like your absolute dream. Winter was so insanely mild. I don't think we ever had a day that got below like 30 degrees. Maybe we did, but I don't remember. And it maybe snowed like once a year and it melted by noon. So it was fun and then it was gone. I don't mind colder winters personally because it means milder summers, because people get all weird when you wander around like without any clothes on, but you can always put on a down coat. So that's my opinion on that. If you're looking for a milder winter though, with access to like the beach and lovely mountains within a few hours of all of those things with lots of shops, this would be a really, really great option, because those places I've heard are gorgeous. Well, I've been to the beach, I haven't been to the mountains, but they're gorgeous. Next, the traffic. Oh, the traffic. There was a lot of it. The Triangle area, which is the area we were living in, that's what they call it, is like exploding in terms of people going and moving there. And the roads were just not made to keep up with it. They were made for more like rural travel. Anyway, it means anytime you go anywhere, you're just gonna be sitting on a lot of traffic, whether that's on surface roads or freeways, and it only seems like it's gonna get worse because they're building houses and developing land like crazy, which also made us a little bit worried about the school situation actually. So in Wake County where we lived, they had a really amazing school district, but the towns in the southern part of the county, like where we were living, were having trouble keeping up with schools because of the increasing population, like very understandably. So even though we lived a quarter of a mile from our elementary school, the schools near us were completely full. So they were taking the kids out and they were being bused an hour and a half away to other areas of the county, which means one, they wouldn't have like friends who lived near them because all their school friends were gonna live up in like North Raleigh, and they would be on a bus for 3 hours a day. And they were starting to discuss planning like more schools. When we were leaving, they were thinking about like, okay, more people are moving, we should make more schools. But our oldest is gonna be in elementary school next year. So we really didn't want to have to put her on a bus for that long, and we just wanted to avoid that situation. But if you move to a more northern part of the county or just an area that's well developed, they will have tons of great schools. They have things called magnet schools too, which is something to look into. I don't really understand them, honestly. Nobody seems to want to go to their assigned school. Like when you talk to other parents, they're like, what school are you going to apply to? Even though they're all public, they like compete for spots, even though their own school is great. So I don't really know what that's all about, but you should probably look into that if you're moving here. But the schools overall, they're great. It's just an overcrowded issue in the areas that are being rapidly developed. And fourth, are we on four? We'll just say it's fourth. People are so overtly surface friendly, which a lot of you might be like, Liz, that's a really good thing. But I am like a grumpy cat type of a human, and this was just not my idea of a good time. People would be like helping you do your checkout at Target, and they wanted to like talk to you the whole time. You're like, hello, I have my, like, I'm listening to a podcast, friend. They're like, no, let's just like chat. We like to go on walks every evening, and whenever one of our neighbors saw us, they would want to like, not just like, oh, hey, they were like, let's chat for 10 minutes. And it was very kind. And they were not in the least bit concerned that like our children were screaming in the stroller and like we were obviously trying to like kind of move on. No, that didn't bother them. They're like, let's please discuss just life, because they had some catching up to do, and it was very well intended, and I 100% know that. It was just a lot. So as humans who don't love small talk and are used to like, hey, relationship with your neighbors, that's kind of what we had before. especially on our like walks and just like wandering around the neighborhood. It was just like an adjustment. And I don't want to admit how many times I would like stand at my front door and hide until my neighbors left so I could run the trash out to the trash can so that they wouldn't see us and then talk to us, because I just wanted to like run out and run back in. There were definitely nice aspects of that for sure though. We like for a little while there knew our neighbors really well. They had our keys, we had theirs, we traded food and we did favors for each other, and it was just very like adorable. It was honestly adorable. And now we are entering the primary, I guess, and probably the more touchy reason that we really left. We just did not feel like we fit in with the vibe of the humans at all. Most of the humans that were there. The area that we lived in was very conservative and very church going, which is absolutely a-okay. Obviously. However, we're like pretty liberal and we don't go to church. And so that was just, it was not the best combination. Even though we had lots of really surface friendliness with a lot of the people around us, we had a really hard time connecting with people on any deeper level because we didn't share a lot of the same values or general thoughts about life. So making friends was hard. Not that you have to, but like there, it seemed like you had to share them. You know what I mean? Because it came up a lot. The insanely divisive election like really didn't help with that. We had a few people that we had sort of started to befriend. We had kids the same age, but there was always something that eventually popped up. And this was again, likely because we lived quite outside of Raleigh, because we didn't want to be in such a populated area. So I think we could have been happier if we chose to live closer to Raleigh, but then Joe might have murdered people with his road rage. And that wouldn't have gone well because the traffic's even worse when you get close to there. So anyway, we had people that we would start to befriend, but then they would mention something about like just in normal conversation, like idiot Democrats did something or found out, they'd ask where we go to church and we're like, oh, we don't. And then they would kind of be like, oh, you're going to introduce my child to the devil. And then even though we would kind of set up next play dates, like they never ever texted back and like just stuff like that. So this was completely our fault. We did we did some research, but not a ton on like the cultural aspects of the area. There is nothing wrong with obviously holding your own religious and personal and political beliefs. And the fact that there are churches on every corner and most of the population leans quite conservative is a huge selling point for most people. Most people are like, I love that. Like they'll fit in because of that. But it's not our thing. So it was just not a good fit. I can't even begin to tell you how many of my neighbors and my patients would literally just randomly in public, they would bring up like the stupid liberal idiots and then ask who I voted for. And like totally unprovoked, just weaved into a conversation where you were like, oh, how's your day going? And they were like, so-and-so, like, this is what I did. I went water skiing and who'd you vote for? And you're like, oh, I've had more than one patient tell me that they didn't ever want me to provide care for them again after they learned, like they asked the question. And then if I answered, they would say, I never want to see you again because I'm a dangerous menace. Well, literally someone told me I was a dangerous menace. So needless to say, I didn't feel like warm and fuzzy about all that. And it was very hard to find friends. And it was just really lonely. So I'm sure I could have worked harder to find people who identified in the way that I did a little bit more. And like I said, there were so many lovely humans as long as we just didn't talk about that, but it just like wasn't our vibe because it seemed like you needed to talk about that with people to get to the next level. I don't know. That might've just been my experience. So things were a little bit rough. Just kind of in general. And then the pandemic happened. And oh, the pandemic. We were usually the only ones in stores wearing a mask when one of us went out. For months, my patients quite literally screamed at me when I asked them to wear a mask before it became kind of more of like the norm last summer where like people were like, okay, I guess I'll wear this. At least 3 to 4 times a day, someone spent most of their appointment just telling me that COVID was not even real and that I was brainwashed for believing it, again, because I was a crazy liberal. Countless people lied about their COVID symptoms in the office. So when we would go into the office, you know, they would answer all the screening questions like, no, I don't have any of these things, only to get back into the room with me and be like, oh yeah, I have a cough, I'm short of breath, I have a headache that won't go away. And now they've exposed like the whole office. I would have all those appointments, and then in between like those appointments and people screaming at me, I was on the phone with patients whose loved ones were dying. They had died, or I was providing families with their loved ones' advance directive information because they were headed to the hospital with them and they didn't know what the outcomes of that were going to be. So that was just exhausting, like work-wise. And then like personally, when I finally felt safe enough, like, okay, I'm going to take my kids to the playground there in the last few months, the other parents would literally stand around in a group and like mock me and my daughter openly, saying like, oh, it must be so miserable to have a mom who is so scared and paranoid that they make you wear a mask outside at the park, like when all the kids are clustered together. There was no social distancing happening. Like 3-year-olds don't know how to do that, so just put a mask on them. And she didn't mind. And they would just like openly make fun of us. My neighbors, who we used to all like chat nicely on our walks, they talked about us constantly, loudly to our faces. There was a huge group of people that are kind of like our age. They had young kids, and they would have block parties that pre-COVID we would, swing by. And they would have these like twice a month barbecue type things, no masks, no social distancing throughout the entire pandemic. And obviously we didn't go. And they would comment really loudly when we were out walking, again, like to our faces where our kids could hear, because apparently everyone always like needed us to know that this is how they felt. They would be like, oh, there's that family who won't let you play with their other kids. They'd tell their kids like, yes, honey, those girls probably do want to play with you, but their parents aren't letting them play in groups so they don't get a cold. And that was like every day. So that was just hard. We were usually the only ones, again, in the store, like wearing masks. And when I finally got to go get my COVID shot, I had to drive through a protest line of people screaming and telling me I was injecting myself with the mark of the beast and making myself infertile. It was just, and so you can imagine, that was just a challenging environment to be in. And like I said, probably up towards Raleigh, it was probably totally different, but where we were, that's what it was. And I'm sure it's not how it was everywhere. I think Raleigh sounded like it was better, but where I was, it totally sucked. And then kind of the straw that broke the camel's back was how blatant racism was. And again, if you live there, I'm not saying you're racist at all. I'm saying I have lived in many states as an adult: California, Delaware, Michigan, North Carolina. And I have never, ever seen racism like I saw in North Carolina. I'm 100% sure it exists in all of those places, but this was just on a different kind of level. And I am going to give some examples, not to say like, oh, North Carolina is this, but simply because as a white woman, I was completely oblivious that this even existed, which I understand is incredibly naive and privileged. But after talking about with some people on, like, we were doing an Instagram poll, I know that I'm not alone, and we cannot fix rampant racism in the world unless we talk about it and are aware of how it exists in places other than our own backyards, because that's all I ever knew was, oh, this has been my experience seeing it. So I think it's really important to talk about it. I'll go through a couple of examples, but I think it's important to consider, especially if you are considering moving to a more rural outskirt area of North Carolina, because it's kind of a mess in that department. So I lived in a new construction neighborhood, and one evening we were out for a walk, and there was a family looking at a house site with like the showroom person. And they were Black. There were 2 kids, mom and dad. When I first drove around, when we first were walking our loop in the neighborhood, there was one white dude in a truck that had driven up with his pickup truck and a Confederate flag waving out the back of the truck. And he was like sitting there in the back of his truck with his arms crossed like this and just glaring at them. And when we did the loop again, and then there were 4, and they were all just staring at them. They had surrounded their car with their trucks. Their Confederate flags were like out, they were flying. And they all just sat there in their trucks like this, staring at them. The next day, my neighbor, a retired woman, who had always been like so sweet to us, again, we had her keys, we shared food, like we ran groceries for each other, remarked that she was worried about those types of people wanting to move into the neighborhood. And I said, like, people with children? And she said, it's not the kids I'm worried about. It's, what color they are. I don't really want that trouble here, if you know what I mean. And I kid you not, my jaw literally just dropped. And I am not a speechless human often, but I was then. A different family moved in later down the street, different house. They were from Pakistan. they had kids that were our age, and a lot, the mom and I would go on walks together, like little joint walks. And sometimes the kids would play pre-pandemic, and there was another family with kids that were our same age. And one time we were all at the pool, and their son, I heard him telling my daughter that they couldn't play with all of them because everybody's like, oh, come over and play. And he was like, I can't play with you because my mom said that your other friends, like the other girl, they called him by name, they're weird and they smell bad. I was like, what? At work, I had a Black NP student, and she was absolutely brilliant. But almost every patient I saw thought she was either the receptionist or an MA. And when I told them that she was a doctoral student going to become a nurse practitioner, they were like, oh, that's wonderful. And acted like this was the most shocking thing that they had legitimately ever heard. Another student wore a hijab, and I had many patients ask me after she left the room, do you feel safe around her? Like literally one of the sweetest humans I've probably ever met. She told me that when she would drive to our clinical site, she hated it because people that were, when she was driving there, would like flip her off and yell at her and try to drive her off the road. And she felt generally unsafe. And you'll be totally shocked to know that like none of my white students ever experienced that. And then the thing that was the absolute, like, we need to leave here now was with the, after George Floyd was murdered, there were protests, like there were all over the country and towns nearby. There were peaceful protests, not in my town, not shockingly, but up in Raleigh, like peacefully protesting that George Floyd had been murdered. And in anticipation of these peaceful marches, people set up white tents, other people set up white tents, filled them with ammo, and decorated them with Confederate flags and said, defend your homes here, get your ammo here. And I thought, that's okay, that's like kind of weird. But it went from like weird to an alternate universe when parades of pickup trucks started driving around the parking lot of my work and all over my town with loaded like automatic machine gun type looking things loaded in the back of their trucks, hanging out, Confederate flags flying, people sitting in the back of the trucks with signs saying, run, N-word, run. And that was the day that I came home and I was like, we cannot live here anymore. And that, my friends, is the honest reason that we left. For a long time, I tried to sugarcoat why we left because people who enjoy living there got offended whenever I said this, and then I felt bad. But I am not going to continue to avoid difficult conversations and topics that just for the sake of making other people feel comfortable. Because like I said in the beginning, if you don't do these things and you love that area, then there's no reason for you to be offended. If you are a racist and you are offended, then good. I am trying to offend you or at least make you realize what you are doing. But everyone else, like, please, please be the humans to stand up against things like racism. An actionable way to do this is to stop a conversation in its tracks when you encounter it. I often would just say, hey, that's racist. And that was that. The conversation ended rapidly because how are they supposed to respond? But it set a firm boundary that I would not tolerate that. And I maybe hope that it caused them to think about why they tolerated it and brought it up in the first place as well. And I know those conversations are uncomfortable. Like I know. But that whole thing really made me realize how privileged it was that I was uncomfortable for having to speak up. And for many people, the uncomfortable part is just like existing. So please, please end those conversations when you hear them. And I hope that with some of that, like going on and on and on again, some change can happen because there are so many lovely things about that area. There's tons of shops and things to do, especially when you live closer to like Raleigh or the cities. I don't know about any of the other major cities because I've never been there, but I am, like I said, I've heard the mountains are absolutely beautiful. The beach is awesome. It doesn't take long to get to either of those. There were so many parks, so many festivals, so many just things to do outdoors. And like I did meet a lot of really lovely humans. And I do think that if we had had family in the area, we could have relocated to a town that would have been a little bit more our vibe and we would have been very happy there. But since we don't have family in the area, it just made so much more sense to move closer to family and to a state that overall was a little bit more aligned with our preferences, where we might feel like we fit in a little bit more and can just be our grumpy cat selves. So again, I'm not making this video to tell you not to move there. Side note, if you are moving there though, move fast because housing prices are skyrocketing and it's exploding. So go fast. It's insane. Many people absolutely love it there, and they find their people, and their whole family ends up moving there. And if you do live there, I would also love to hear from you, because obviously I only lived in one small area and I have my biases coming into it. So I would love to hear like what city in North Carolina you lived in, what you liked about it, what you didn't like about it, because you guys are going to be able to bring in so much more like information than I could. And you've had your own experiences, and it'll just be a really cool resource, because it's really hard to find where to live, like what it's actually like until you live there. Then it's kind of already too late. So let's help people get a good idea, like would I like this and would I not. Thank you as always for commenting down below on these types of videos and being my best resource. And thanks for watching, friends. And I will see you next time. Bye.